Tuesday evenings were invariably busy, especially on the second Tuesday of each month when I had a Kiwanis Club meeting from 6:30 onwards. Usually May and I didn't get home until around 5 or 5:30. Since Kiwanis was a dinner party, I didn't have to worry about cooking, but May, my wife of 4 years, always had some last-minute tasks for me to complete before I could leave. However, the real problem was my own struggle. According to May, she was 3 months pregnant and dealing with wild hormones. Despite her pregnancy, she remained the charming woman I married. Now, with the radiant glow of impending motherhood, I found it especially difficult to tear myself away from her even for a short evening. She was perfect for me, 5'3", 110 pounds, with light brown hair and stunning blue eyes. Her looks complimented me, but I appreciated her for much more than her looks. She had a sharp mind and keen observation, although her beauty certainly didn't hurt. Even so, I had to be out by 6:10 to make my appointment on time, which meant rushing to shower, get dressed, give May a quick kiss, and head out. I usually didn't get home until after 11 o'clock, often closer to midnight. Today's meeting seemed to be no different. After a quick shower, I put on some pants and a sweatshirt, grabbed my briefcase, and walked through the kitchen to the garage. After kissing May's neck and giving her a reassuring squeeze to calm her down, I reluctantly left her and headed out. It was tempting to miss the meeting, not only for mine, but also because I had a project in the garage. I was installing a baby monitor for a kindergarten, figuring it would take me about 30 minutes to finish and then proudly show my wife. She always appreciated my small achievements, and I didn't mind the praise, even if it was inappropriate. After all, I was a guy, and a little stroking of my woman's ego didn't hurt. When I got into the car, I engaged the garage door opener and started the engine. As the car rumbled to life, I placed my briefcase on the seat next to me and double-checked that I had everything I needed, cell phone, calculator, notebook, all in stock. Then I backed out of the garage and drove down the driveway, waving to May through the kitchen window as she washed the dishes. She waved back as I stepped outside. Before I could shift the car into gear or even close the garage door with the remote, my cell phone rang, halting all movement as I answered it. As I greeted the caller, I looked up to give May another wave, but she was already out of sight. The voice on the other end said that I was caught at a good moment. The caller informed me that today's appointment is canceled. Our president, Patrick, was called out of town, along with Everett and Jules. Due to the absence of key officers, it was decided to cancel the meeting this month. Nothing was planned for today unless I had something urgent. Needless to say, I was relieved that the evening was free. I just pulled back into the garage, noticing that May's face hadn't appeared in the kitchen window of our 3-bedroom house. She later admitted that she had not left the kitchen, waiting for my return to surprise her later. If she was somewhere else, she wouldn't have heard me pull into the garage. After entering the garage, I finally closed the garage door and got into the car to relax for a few minutes. I decided to order pizza for dinner tonight instead of cooking myself, which allowed me to focus on feeding the monitor. All aspects related to the camera and the nursery have been completed, except for some connections to the garage and final testing. Cosmetic adjustments to the nursery were minor. The camera, discreetly installed in a corner, went unnoticed by May for 10 days due to its small size. I would tackle those tasks another time. May mentioned in passing how convenient a monitor in the nursery would be to watch the baby while he slept, and pushed me to wire the house accordingly. I also decided to install sound monitors in each room. The idea for a visual monitor in a child's room came when he saw equipment that a friend was throwing away. While the main controls were in our bedroom, I installed an additional set in the garage where I spent quite a bit of time working, complete with speakers and an old TV that doubled as a video monitor. Such an installation made it possible to flexibly monitor the children's room from anywhere in the house. As mentioned, the project was almost complete. Just a minor tweak needed before I could surprise May and relax for the night. I decided to try to get some work done before relaxing in front of the TV or spending time with May. I got out of the car and started checking my work. After about 20 minutes, everything seemed to be working properly, so I started testing the sound channels. Each could be controlled individually, or I could route them all to 5 used speakers above my workstation. Testing them one by one, starting in the living room, they all worked perfectly, with impressive sensitivity. I could even hear May taking a shower in the master bedroom. I put them all live and down in the garage and then got down to making the final connections for the video monitor. I was a little lost in checking the wiring when I heard someone talking over the living room speaker, sounding like May on the phone. Curious, I turned up the volume and found it to be perfectly clear. $1.20 spent on 5 speakers was a real bargain. May told Roger over speaker that it would be greatly appreciated if he could be there by 7 o'clock. My wife's voice confirmed, "Already, lover." In response, Roger assured May, "Okay, love, see you around. Don't you dare be late. We won't have enough time. And no, don't expect a repeat." After a short pause, May giggled and hung up. What was it about? Who was Roger? The only Roger I knew was Roger Jenkins, Crystal's husband. Crystal was May's college roommate and still her best friend. Roger and I got along well. He was a funny guy. I guessed that he and May were planning something for Crystal. Well, I will soon find out. It was only 15 minutes until 7 o'clock. Leaving the guesswork behind, I pressed the on button on the baby room camera and sat back with a satisfied smile. The monitor showed the spare bedroom where the camera focused on the large bed, surprisingly covered with unturned sheets. It was the first time I had seen May do this without expecting guests. As I adjusted the video controls, I zoomed in and out on the camera. At the widest zoom, everything in the bedroom could be seen except for the corner where the camera was fixed to the ceiling. Leaving it in this setting, I critically examined the crisp image, seizing a door, a window, a closet, and a well-made bed. Satisfied with my work, I started tidying up the workbench. Satisfied with the audio and video system I had created by pulling beer out of an old refrigerator, I relaxed in my $1.50 chair, a garage accessory that my wife wouldn't allow in the house, but fit perfectly in the garage. Almost finishing my beer, thinking about ordering a pizza and planning to surprise May, my thoughts were interrupted by the doorbell ringing. After a moment, May greeted the visitor and expressed her impatience. She invited Roger in, mentioning that they had until 10:30 before it was all over. May assured him that by now she was all over him. The shock was not caused by words but by my wife's husky voice, a sound I only heard in our bedroom or on the way there. It was her closeness, her seductive voice. Choking on the last sip of beer, I sat down abruptly. The front door closed and May's voice continued, letting Roger know that judging by the bulge in his pants, she wasn't the only one having a hard time. It looked really good. She asked him to come over and say hello for real. Roger replied and several grunts and moans followed. Then May's voice again, telling him not to stay there and to go back to our room because she had everything ready for them. I felt sick to my stomach. May seemed to be leading him back to our bedroom. Confused and unsure of what to do, my initial impulse was to storm into the kitchen and kick Roger out of the house. But what was the reality? I took a deep breath. It couldn't be what it sounded like. May and I were deeply in love, and I was sure she was as faithful as I was. While she teased me about having crushes on other women, I knew it was just harmless. I never felt like leaving, and we were compatible lovers. She always had everything she wanted in our moments of intimacy. Multiple climaxes were the norm for her, and I made sure to satisfy her until she indicated otherwise. It must have been a misunderstanding on my part. She was my best friend, and we were expecting a baby together. Sitting in a worn chaise longue, I noticed movement on the monitor in the baby's room. The door opened and May gently guided Roger into the room with the bed prepared. Moving him to the other side, between the bed and the window, she staggered back and stood in front of the closed closet door, looking across the bed at Roger and almost directly into the camera. May was wearing her worn Saturday-Sunday morning dressing gown, which only reached mid-thigh. However, her hair was pulled back into a sleek bun on top of her head, accentuating her slender neck with just the right amount of makeup. She looked like a princess except for the old worn robe on her legs. Her feet were adorned with high-heeled slippers that I had given her for her birthday 2 months ago. Although she wore them that night, and I complimented how they enhanced her legs, I couldn't recall seeing them outside of her clothes since. As soon as the thought hit me, I realized I hadn't noticed them in her closet since then, and I felt like I was on the verge of tears. It couldn't be. Across from the bed of one of my best friends, my wife stood tall and proud, looking into his eyes. Her hand slowly moved up to the neck of the robe, and with her left hand she pinched it at the neckline. She undid each button with her right hand, letting the robe fly outwards, teasing Roger with glimpses of the inside. Unbuttoning all the buttons while still keeping the robe closed, she brought her right hand to her throat again. With both hands, she slowly ripped open the robe, pausing for a moment to let us admire the vision framed by the robe. Then she dropped her hands and shrugged, letting the robe fall and slide around her legs. She was wearing the underwear that I gave her for Valentine's Day and that she modeled for me on that special day. I haven't seen him since. Still keeping her eyes on Roger, she raised her hand and gestured for him to come to her. As he turned around the bed, I noticed the stunned face of my former friend. He stammered that he was expecting to be with May tonight, but she had made this evening really special for him. He expressed how beautiful she was, mentioning, "God, you are beautiful," both undressed. Suddenly snapping out of my daytime depression, I knew I would need evidence of the unfolding situation. After thinking, I hurried into the empty living room, working quietly and quickly. After getting a fresh SD card, I went back to the garage, plugged it into the monitor, and turned everything back on. Roger and my wife were on the monitor, and I watched as they came to the bed with a big hug. They entered into an act of intimacy that seemed to last forever, Roger driving into her relentlessly. After about 15 minutes, she tried to break away. Looking at the torturous scene on the monitor, I got up and started walking. I knew entering the house would lead to a violent outcome. I felt sick to my stomach and couldn't decide what to do next. "Roger, if you don't want Gary to come over, you have to go now." She bent down and picked up his clothes and handed them to him, gathering the remnants of the lingerie she had given him with her. Put everything on the dresser. I watched as May threw on her old dressing gown and took the sheets off the bed, without even waiting for Roger to finish dressing, before rolling them up and taking them to the washing machine in the laundry room between the kitchen and the garage. When she returned to the drawing room, Roger was present, and in a boastful, melodious tone that men often adopt, he greeted her. He commented that it was great and suggested we talk about doing it again. She responded firmly, stating that she meant it when she said only once and only because of their deal. Roger acknowledged her decision, adding that perhaps it was for old time's sake. He expressed his understanding, saying that it was only for one time, but if she ever thought about how great it was, maybe they would try again. I heard another sloppy kiss before Roger's footsteps seemed to disappear. As he walked to the door, I could hear the impatience in my wife's voice and the soft sounds she made, but it was not noticed at the time, nor was the exhale she made when she finally followed him to the door. Literally sick to my stomach, I lay in the ratty chair, staring at the empty bedroom displayed on the monitor. Glancing at the clock, I saw that it was 10:37. They stuck to their schedule very well. I heard Roger mumble something near the door, and clearly heard May reply that it was only once, and only because they had agreed so many years ago. She emphasized that I am her husband, her lover, and the person she wants in her life. She expressed her uncertainty as to why they would do it now, and mentioned that Crystal, even though she was okay with it, was her best friend and more important than the affair. She questioned Roger about Crystal's importance to him. I couldn't make out Roger's mumbling, but I heard another kiss and then the door closed softly. Almost immediately I heard the lock click. If I hadn't been filled with tears and despair, I think the exhaustion in Roger's voice after his session with my wife would have been funny. At the moment, of course, it didn't seem funny at all. After the door closed, May reappeared in the bedroom. I couldn't seem to think of it as a nursery anymore. She quickly walked carefully around the room, making sure there was nothing wrong. After the meeting, after gathering her clothes, she disappeared down the hall, and soon I heard her in our bedroom. I listened to her take a shower, and then she came out, and I heard the bed rustle. My wife seemed to have gone to sleep. Glancing at the clock, I saw that it was almost 11 o'clock. I just sat and stared into space. I had no idea where my life and my wife would go. All I knew was that I was in grief. Thoughts and ideas were crowding in my head. In some, I thought about what could justify my wife for what she did. In others, I responded with excuses, and in others, I asked myself what I had done to make May need another man. Sometime after midnight, I tiredly got up and turned off my electronics. After entering the house through the garage door, I headed straight for the master bedroom. Passing by the spare room where my wife was with Roger, I looked inside. The room was as I had last seen it on Monday evening. The bed was undressed and nothing seemed out of place. Nothing said that something had happened. Moaning to myself, I walked into my bedroom. After glancing at my sleeping wife, I went to the bathroom, brushed my teeth, and went about my business. I take off my clothes and leave them in the laundry basket before throwing them away. I looked inside and it was empty. There is no dirty laundry. When I got into bed, my wife rolled over and raised her hand on me. She sleepily asked how my night was. After a moment of silence, I told her that it was very traumatic, but I will tell her about it later. She usually snuggled up to me. Tonight, however, she just lay quietly with her arm back and her back to me. She seemed to fall back asleep immediately, although I thought she wasn't asleep yet, listening to her breathing. I just rolled away from her, then stared into the darkness. I don't know how much I slept that night. I couldn't remember actually sleeping. When the alarm went off, I was just lying there. Of course, I was in no condition to go to work. I told May I thought I had the flu. I stayed in bed until I heard her car leave for work. I got up and started carefully opening the drawers, trying not to move anything, looking for May's dresser. In the bottom drawer, folded and stored in a paper bag and under several sweaters, were the underwear that Roger liked. I pulled them out, noticing that some of the ruined linen was still damp. After calling my boss sick, I played the tape I had recorded last night. I originally fast-forwarded it to avoid repeating the experience and ensure the quality of the tape. However, as time went on, I began to notice details that I had initially overlooked. The morning was spent scrutinizing the video content, and I made 2 duplicates along with 2 phone calls. When I got home, I realized that I hadn't eaten anything since the previous dinner. After skipping dinner and feeling nauseous from breakfast, I skipped meals. While May arrived at her usual time around 4:30, when she went in to kiss me, I turned away, causing her to give me a strange look. Finally, at 5:30, I decided to face the problem head on. There was no point in delaying any longer, only causing myself more suffering. I asked Gary if May could spare a few minutes to show her what I had done for the baby monitor we were discussing. Her response was to wait until lunch because she was just about to put it on. I picked up my cell phone and asked what she preferred for lunch. She suggested Chinese, and I immediately ordered it with delivery. I then led her into the bedroom, showing her the controls on the console outside the door. I left the sound on, going from room to room talking to her through the monitor. Although she couldn't answer, the smile on her face upon my return indicated that it was working better than planned. Turning on the video function, I told her to wait and see. I then went into the spare room and stood where she had been last night. I grimaced and mimicked the slow knocking and grinding before walking back into our bedroom. She exclaimed, "Gary, this is perfect. When did you start it?" I replied that I had received it in the afternoon, in fact, last night. She smiled in surprise, as if trying to remember when I had taken the time to set it up. I told her there was one more thing to show and took her by the hand, leading her to the garage. I explained that since I spend a lot of time there, I thought it would be a good idea to have a monitoring station to cover the baby when she needed to go out. I then activated the system in the garage, remembering something from the night before. I added one thing. "Let me show you how it works," and I inserted the USB drive into the TV. "Watch the bedroom and see what happens," I told her. Looking at the monitor, we saw the same view as our bedroom, the original scene of an empty room, although the bed was now unmade. I then used the remote to turn on the TV, and the image immediately changed to show May kneeling in front of Roger. Glancing at her face, I saw the color drain from it, and she seemed to stagger before regaining her balance. She suddenly looked at me, and I just stared into her eyes and quickly walked forward, stopping in just a couple of seconds. Then I gestured for her to look at the screen again. When she looked back, she saw Roger grabbing at her underwear. Although there was no sound, we could see May say something to him. We both watched and then heard her make a small cry, which I took to be pain. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw tears streaming down May's face and also noticed her wince slightly as she saw Roger ram into her roughly again. After stopping the video, I asked if she wanted to see more. My wife just looked at me helplessly. I asked May to come into the house, feeling the need for a serious conversation and unsure of where things were going. I led her into the kitchen, where I sat her down at the kitchen table and sat at the end of the table next to her. May mumbled through her tears that she could explain, and I replied that I needed explanations. I asked for an explanation, asking May about the promise she made to Roger back in college. I wanted to know how many years ago she promised herself to him. May began to explain, saying that it was not so. She and Roger dated when he had a reputation as a performer. May mentioned that she started rooming with Crystal, and Roger started seeing them both for a while. She elaborated on the relationship dynamics between Crystal, Roger, and herself, mentioning that Roger and Crystal are headed for a serious relationship. May recounted a conversation she had with Roger one night in her room where they became riskier as they drank. In that conversation, she revealed to Roger that the only reason they weren't intimate was because of her fear of getting pregnant. May explained Roger's expectation that his partners would take the pill and mentioned her reluctance to be too liberal with her favors. May continued her explanation by reminding her that she and Roger had an argument, and she wrote a promissory note saying that if she could be sure he couldn't get her pregnant, she would spend the evening in bed with him. When she stopped, I stared at her in disbelief. "How long ago was that?" I asked. "About 6 years," was her answer. May went on to tell me that the note was one of the jokes between Roger and her ever since. "We announced her pregnancy to Roger and Crystal 2 weeks ago, and after the initial congratulations, Roger and I went to their garage to look at the problem he was having. When I left the room, Crystal looked her in the eye and said the promissory note was due." May was shocked that Crystal even knew about it, and surprised to learn that Crystal took it seriously. When Roger and I got back, I remembered the case of Dutch beer I was going to bring into the kitchen. Insisting that it would only take me a few minutes to get something special, I left the other 3 and went home alone to get the beer. While I was gone, Crystal brought up the subject of the note again. May was again surprised to find that Roger seemed to believe that the note would be carried out. He was quite indignant when he heard what May thought of welshing in the agreement. This was all after 3 hours of non-stop drinking, the last until our baby finished breastfeeding. May found herself agreeing to honor the old note. Before I got back, the 3 of them had decided that she would entertain Roger last night. I told May that her story was one of the strangest I had ever heard, and it was hard for me to accept. I asked her who is the father of the child she is carrying. May winced, tears streaming down her cheeks again. My next question was about how many other bills are now outstanding and how much she paid for the date. May was yelling at me, saying they weren't there and begging me, "Gary, don't. I love you, Gary." She assured me that this was an isolated incident and would not happen again. May begged me to listen to her, admitting that trying to explain might seem absurd, but she felt obliged to do so. She emphasized that it was not planned or wanted, and she has never been unfaithful to me. May begged me to believe her. She fell to her knees in tears, covering her face. I asked May if I could ask her a few questions, and if she would be honest. She answered in the affirmative, urging me to ask her. May emphasized that this was a one-time thing and not something she wanted to do. She admitted that doing this seems unbelievable to her now, but I am worth more to her than life. I looked at her kneeling before me, her heart aching and her stomach in knots. This was my best friend, the person I wanted by my side for the rest of my life, but I had to know if she was who I thought she was. I asked May if she could say no to that. She replied that she could, but felt that it was about her pride. May explained that she was afraid to tell me for fear that I would not understand. She said she felt I would have done the same if I were her. She clarified that when they agreed, she was drunk, and when she was sober, she did not throw out. When it was done, she didn't know me, and it wasn't something to trick me. It was what she had promised a friend so dear at that time in that place, and she believed it was right. On reflection, I replied that she could have said no after she sobered up, but felt it was the right thing to do out of respect for the man her friend had become over the years. I asked if that was correct, and she confirmed. I asked her to think carefully about whether she was looking forward to it, and she yelled back that after a while she started to think it wasn't real and just a joke. However, she understood that it was not a joke. It was real. Staring into her eyes, I asked about the past 2 weeks if she was looking forward to it. May took a deep breath and said no. She explained that it was something she had to do out of duty, not pleasure. I continued to look at her, and May, looking down at the table, whispered that, "Well, yes, Gary." She guessed she was looking forward to it, but not in the way I might have thought. She clarified that she never thought of cheating on me. She never wanted to. However, unexpectedly, such a situation arose. She felt she had to go through with it, and when she did, she saw no reason not to enjoy it. She emphasized that she never felt like it was something she had to do because I wasn't enough for her. It was something she had to appreciate, so she rationalized that she could make it special because nothing like will never happen again. Taking a shaky breath, I let it out slowly. I recalled a memory about 6 weeks ago when I called May on my cell phone on my way back from a conference. We teased for a few minutes, and then I asked her to meet me at a party in Atherton. I suggested doing it on a weekend away from home, maybe have some fun. I asked if she remembered, and she said yes, mentioning it was a great weekend with a shaky smile. Then I asked if she wanted to make this weekend great for us, for me. May expressed that question. Of course I did. And that was it. We had a great time. This time he gave me a genuine smile. I then asked if she remembered what she packed for that weekend. She brought a nice dress in case we wanted to dance, which we did, and comfortable clothes for walking. I told her to wait a minute, explaining that I needed to play the video again to help her understand what the question was about. I turned and walked back to our bedroom, checking in the middle of the hall to make sure she was following me and still there. I turned on the TV in the bedroom and pressed the play button on the remote. The scene cuts to May still kneeling in front of Roger. She stood up and turned toward the bed, facing the camera in the corner, recording her actions. I asked what she was wearing, and May blushed and said she was wearing white underwear, a set from Valentine's Day. She mentioned that I never wore it for her except when I modeled it after she gave it to me. May explained that there was nowhere to wear it, then stopped in confusion. I reminded her that she didn't wear it to the Holiday Inn. She changed into a peasant skirt and a white blouse. Later she wore white cotton underwear and bra, probably the same as now. I asked her if she remembered what she was wearing to bed that night, and she said in a low voice that she was wearing her Donald Duck t-shirt. Looking her in the eyes, I asked May about the holiday weekend, saying that she had mentioned that it was special and that she hadn't had a date with Roger yet. I pointed out that she was wearing one of the nicest things she owned, something I had bought for us to share with Roger, not for me, and asked how special she thought she was by putting me. May dropped her shoulders and just looked at me. I went on to say that if I didn't love her, we wouldn't be living in this house together. I stressed that if I didn't think she was something special to me, I wouldn't marry her. I talked about the unexpected call that canceled my meeting last night, which led me to one of the worst nightmares I could think of. Roger, one of my best friends, if not my best friend, showed up when I was supposed to be in a meeting. My woman, May, met him at the door and took him into a room in which she had some preoccupation in preparation for the meeting and gave him a strip. I noticed that she had dressed her body to show something that she hadn't done for me in over a year. When I asked her about it, she claimed that the meeting wasn't important to her, but she went to a lot of trouble getting dressed, doing her hair and makeup, which she hadn't done for me since Hector was a puppy. This showed me that the meeting was crucial to her, seeing it as a treat she had to prepare for. It also suggests that her time with me was routine and of much less value. I saw her do things for Roger that she only did for me on special occasions and do some things for him that she refused to do to and for me. Tears welled up in my wife's eyes and she slapped them away. She insisted that this was not the case and expressed her love for me, stressing how much I meant to her. Sitting up on the bed, I looked at her and said that I wasn't sure what steps we could take yet. However, I mentioned that I planned to call Roger and Crystal and ask them to come over that evening. I asked May about Crystal's awareness of the situation and then proceeded to dial their number. Crystal responded, and I asked them to attend a short meeting that evening. While I was on the phone, May delivered Chinese food to the door. Despite my lack of appetite, I forced myself to eat, anticipating a long and emotional night ahead. May lazily played with her food, and for a moment I almost believed her assurances that this was a one-time occurrence and that she still loved me. Around 7:15, the doorbell rang. Before opening the door, I told May that I suspected there was more to this situation than she could fathom. As I greeted Roger and Crystal, they both smiled at me. However, I couldn't help feeling that each of them shared a thin, understanding smile with May. Roger in particular seemed possessive in the way he looked at my wife, and I noticed May cringe a bit at the sight of it as we all settled down on the couch. I gestured for May to join them, pointing to the couch next to Crystal, but she chose her chair off to the side. I thought about a variety of topics, including a new monitoring system I was developing. I refrained from revealing its functionality or what it showed last night. Crystal and Roger looked surprised, asking why they had been summoned. I finally broached the subject, jokingly offering a drink to cheer me up. Everyone accepted, and I served everyone drinks they liked, with Crystal white wine, Jack Daniels and Roger's 7-Up, May's orange juice because of her pregnancy, and what looked like my gin and tonic but was pure tonic. I sat down on my shirt next to the TV to maintain some semblance of calm. After interviewing everyone, I finally asked Crystal what motivated her to create the situation. She looked surprised and asked what I meant. I clarified my question by asking why she worked so hard to organize everything. When I finished speaking, Roger spluttered and choked on his drink. Shifting my gaze to him, I continued, admitting that I understood what he was getting out of it, but doubting if there was more to it than that. Trying to focus on both women at the same time, I shifted my eyes back and forth. When I approached Roger, I expressed concern about his reputation as a playboy, believing that another conquest was not worth the risk. He stumbled through his answer, explaining that he had been home the night before when Kiwanis was called off. He mentioned being in the garage when I met May and when I arrived. To back up his claim, he turned on the TV to show a live feed from the spare room camera I had just finished setting up before he arrived. He noted the quality of the picture, indicated the time of its installation. May covered her face with her hands and Roger's face turned pale. Crystal looked at me with a seductive smile. As I continued, I questioned the purpose of the whole situation. Crystal crossed her legs and her foot began to bounce up and down. She asked what I thought it meant. Tu responded by mentioning his reputation and Roger's reputation, noting that even though they were straight with us, I received several comments at Kiwanis. I expressed my relief that they hadn't told us anything, but I assumed that would change soon. Crystal confirmed that it wasn't the ideal way to bring up the issue, but agreed that it was time to address the issue. I looked at my surprised wife, May. I used to think she knew about it, but now I'm not so sure. May's friend and her husband Roger have been involved in the Key Club for the past couple of years. They meet on Friday nights at Barney's Broiler. A group of them gathers in the back room for dinner, where each couple brings a house key with their address. They drop the keys into a barrel similar to those used in lotto games. After dinner, the wives separate and go to their respective homes to prepare for intimacy with a partner they are not used to. Meanwhile, the husbands pull out the key. According to the rules, every guy can see the address. If it's his, he holds it in his left hand, pulls out the other key, and drops his wife's key back into the barrel. Some guys can check the address, and if it's with someone they recently made love to or don't like, they'll pull another key. However, they can only play twice. If they pull the key from their wife a second time, they're out of luck. The guys then go out drinking before going on a weekend date. It's not just for a couple of hours or a night, it's a whole weekend. Crystal and Roger being around us led others in the Key Club to believe that we were involved in an exchange with them on the side. Many other boys have expressed interest in May, not just Roger. As I recounted these details, the room fell silent, and I watched each of my comrades intently. May looked at me, clearly surprised and shocked. Crystal had a wry smile on her, her leg bouncing anxiously. After hearing my description, Roger looked smug and somewhat relieved. Before you go any further, May, there's something you should know about your lover from last night. May's face paled again as I recounted the situation, and it was clear that she didn't want to be reminded of the fragile state of our marriage. I mentioned that Roger was well gifted, and her face went completely red. She covered her face with her hands, glancing at Roger, whose smug look remained accompanied by one of the biggest smiles I'd ever seen. I felt the need to pay attention to the condescending look he gave me before the night ended. I shared my understanding that Roger was considered the prize in these raffles. All the wives were anxious to find out if they had pulled off a highly regarded partner for the weekend, similar to how it worked for the college students as you described. Looking at everyone's faces again, I added that I had already experienced the best. Roger was smiling at me, and when I looked at Crystal, she was smiling at May, who seemed to be slumped back in her chair looking at me a little sickly. Leaning back on my bag, I took a big swig of my tonic. Quite bitter, but still that was the taste in my mouth. Then I sat down and let the silence grow. Roger still looked very pleased with himself, but I thought Crystal wanted to say something. I was silent, letting the tension build. Crystal began by explaining that their arrangement was a good deal, adding spice to the marriage to keep the love alive. According to her, it prevents aging and fatigue. She suggested that loosening up might give our relationship a boost by bringing us closer together. Roger just smiled his usual smile in response. She continued, expressing her belief that it wouldn't affect our friendship and might introduce new ideas for the bedroom. Crystal assured us that there was no pressure, encouraging us to think about it and saying that they would be there for us when we made a decision. In response to this introduction and acknowledgement, I appreciated Crystal's patience, but made it clear that I had not discussed this with May and had no intention of doing so. I have expressed no interest in exchanging or finding another love partner. I emphasized that May and I were intelligent, well-read, imaginative people who didn't need unconventional methods to improve our bed lives. I shared my hope to enjoy our life together for many more years. However, my tone changed when I touched on a more serious issue. I pointed out that Roger didn't practice safe lovemaking, and that worried me. I stressed that May, who is now pregnant with our child, would have to see a doctor to be tested for STDs, creating a difficult situation for both of us. I explained that we could not engage in intimacy until she was tested and tested negative to prevent potential transmission between us. I made sure May understood the gravity of the situation. Looking at our former best friends, I expressed a sense of betrayal, not knowing which of them angered me more. Even so, I conveyed that we would have to stop our meetings for the foreseeable future. I turned off the TV, took out the USB drive, and handed it to May. She crumpled up a few sheets of today's unopened newspaper, lit a match, and lit them in the fireplace. After adding the drive to the pile, we stood together watching the fire burn and burn until only black ash remained where the flash drive was. Looking back, I noticed that both Roger and Crystal were passed out. I noticed the chemical had worked before I called Lopez. 3 hours later, at 11 p.m., the doorbell rang. Greeting Lopez, I pointed to the two limp bodies and confirmed that the package was ready. Lopez asked if I had anything for him, and I pointed to two people on the floor. Lopez went outside and returned with 7 other men. They picked up Crystal, and as they headed towards Roger, I asked them to stop. Grabbing a baseball bat from the stairs, I said I only needed a few swings. Lopez nodded and Roger was placed on the ground. I explained my plan to target specific points, kneecaps, ankles, and 2 sensitive areas, all done in a few quick strokes. May stood with her mouth agape. I expressed my desire to hear the screams, but admitted that he was unconscious. The group took it away and Lopez came back to me 5 minutes later thanking me for the samples. I answered with pleasure. May was left sitting there with her mouth hanging open after Lopez left. The night was cold, and May came up to me, asking what would happen to our former friends. I replied in a cool, even voice that they were going to Mexico to help medical students practice. May asked what would happen if someone came looking for them, and I assured her that Lopez would handle it. I coldly mentioned that she would eliminate them, expressing my indifference to her feelings. I argued that I had no right to be condemned, and emphasized that I had provided them with a benefit to society. Mai was visibly shaken. I informed her that my earlier promise about us getting back together and being physical was a lie. The next morning, we're doing a DNA test on the unborn baby, and if the results show I'm the father, I'll be assisting with the birth. But we would not stay married. She would not take lovers until our son was 10 years old, or I was convinced she would become very useful. In the evening, we filed for divorce so that she gets the house and my financial support until she finds a job. May nodded, expressing her surprise at discovering this side of me, and I walked away, declaring that I didn't know either. The next day, we filed for divorce, and 3 weeks later, we received a DNA report confirming that I am the father. A few months later, we filed for divorce, and 2 months later, I had a son. I spent a lot of time with him, having random conversations with May, but I could never love her back. She kept to the agreement, abstained from lovers, and I supported her financially for 5 years until our son could take care of himself. At that time, I did not meet, directing all my energy to my son. Lopez expressed his gratitude with a substantial thank you gift, and no one came looking for the 2 samples I sent.